I opened my front door that morning expecting to see the mailman, maybe the kid from down the street selling magazine subscriptions for his school fundraiser. Instead, I found myself staring down the barrel of an M4 carbine, held by a man in full tactical gear whose face was hidden behind a black balaclava. Behind him, 5 more similarly dressed figures crouched in ready positions on my lawn, weapons trained on my doorway. Get down now!" the lead officer screamed, his voice muffled by his face covering but carrying enough aggression to make my old drill sergeant proud. "Hands where I can see them!" I'm 78 years old. My knees haven't worked right since a hard landing in Kandahar back in '03, and my reaction time isn't what it used to be. But muscle memory from 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq kicked in. I raised my hands slowly, keeping them visible, making no sudden movements. Duke, my 7-year-old German shepherd, pressed against my leg, a low growl building in his throat. "Easy, boy," I murmured, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Easy." "Control your animal or we'll put it down," another officer shouted, his weapon swinging toward Duke. "He's not aggressive," I said, louder this time. "He's protective. There's a difference. Just let me—" "I said get down. This isn't Nam, Grandpa. Get on the ground now." The Nam comment stung more than I'd like to admit. I hadn't served in Vietnam. I was too young for that war, too old for this one, caught in that strange generation that got to fight in the sandbox instead of the jungle. But before I could process the insult or comply with the order, I felt the distinctive bite of taser probes hitting my chest. The world exploded into white-hot agony. Every muscle in my body contracted at once, sending me crashing to my knees on the hardwood floor of my entryway. I've been shot twice in my military career, taken shrapnel from an IED, even survived a helicopter crash. But nothing compared to the systematic override of my nervous system by 50,000 volts of electricity. Duke went ballistic. My faithful companion, who'd never shown aggression toward anyone in his life, launched himself between me and the officers, barking with a fury I'd never heard from him before. Through the haze of pain, I heard shouts, saw dark figures rushing forward, felt rough hands grabbing my arms and wrenching them behind my back. "No," I gasped, fighting to form words through clenched teeth. "Duke, don't hurt him." Someone's knee pressed into my spine, grinding me into the floor. Cold metal circled my wrists. Zip ties, not standard cuffs. They were treating this like a high-risk warrant, like I was some kind of terrorist, instead of a retired veteran who spent his mornings feeding birds and arguing with Duke about whether it was too early for their walk. "Clear the house!" the team leader barked. "Johnson, Miller, take the back. Rodriguez, upstairs, move!" Boots thundered through my home like an invasion force. I could hear doors being kicked open, furniture overturning, glass breaking. From my position face down on my entryway floor, I watched helplessly as 2 officers cornered Duke in the living room. My boy was terrified, confused, still trying to protect me, even as they aimed their weapons at him. "Please," I begged, my voice raw. "He's just a dog. He's scared. Don't hurt him." "Sir, we need you to calm down," the officer kneeling on my back said, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care about my emotional state. "Stop resisting." Resisting? I was a 78-year-old man who'd just been electrocuted, lying face down with my hands zip-tied behind my back. What exactly did they think I was going to do? Spring up like Jason Bourne and take them all out with my walker? Through my front windows, I could see my neighbors gathering on their lawns. Tom and Martha Wilson from next door, their faces masks of shock. Young Jennifer Hayes from across the street, her phone out, recording everything. Old Sam Kowalski, a Korean war vet who lived 2 houses down, leaning heavily on his cane but standing as straight as his bent spine would allow, glaring at the tactical team with undisguised contempt. "House is clear!" someone shouted from upstairs. "No other occupants, no visible weapons." No visible weapons. Of course there were no visible weapons. I kept my service pistol locked in a safe in my bedroom closet. Hadn't touched it in 2 years. The only dangerous thing in my house was my cooking, according to Duke. The team leader stepped over me, pulling out what looked like a tablet. I could see him comparing something on the screen to the brass numbers on my door frame. Even from my position on the floor, I could see his body language change. His shoulders tensed. He looked at the tablet again, then at the numbers, then back at the tablet. "Shit," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Then louder. "What's this address?" 431 Maple Street, one of his team members responded. "The warrant says 413, the team leader said, and I could hear the dawning realization in his voice. "We're at the wrong fucking house." Silence fell over the team like a blanket. Even through my pain and humiliation, I could appreciate the magnitude of their mistake. In all my years of military service, I'd learned that there were small mistakes, forgetting to salute, missing a deadline, burning the coffee. And there were big mistakes. Conducting a no-knock SWAT raid on the wrong house, that fell firmly in the latter category. "Sir," one of the younger officers said hesitantly, "should we—" "Uncuff him," the team leader ordered, his voice now missing its earlier authority. "Carefully, and someone calm that dog down before it has a heart attack." Hands fumbled with the zip ties, finally cutting them free. Blood rushed back into my hands, bringing with it 1,000 needles of pain. I pushed myself up slowly, every joint protesting, and found myself face to face with the team leader, who had pulled up his balaclava to reveal a young face. Couldn't have been more than 35, now flushed with what I hoped was embarrassment. "Sir, there's been a mistake," he began. "You think?" I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "Was it the part where you electrocuted a senior citizen or the part where you terrorized my dog that gave it away?" Duke had pressed himself into the corner of the living room, shaking. I'd seen that 1,000-yard stare before, in soldiers coming back from bad missions. My dog was traumatized, and that made me angrier than the taser, angrier than the rough treatment, angrier than being face down on my own floor. "We had a warrant for 413 Maple," the team leader continued, as if that explained everything. "Drug operation, armed and dangerous suspects." "Do I look armed and dangerous to you, son?" I asked, struggling to my feet. My chest still burned where the taser probes had hit, and I could feel my heart skipping beats. Not a good sign at my age. I'm a 78-year-old man with a bad back and a dog who's afraid of butterflies. The officer, his vest identified him as Sergeant Mitchell, had the grace to look ashamed. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion. We'll be on our way." "Confusion?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You call assaulting a senior citizen in his own home a confusion? You traumatized my dog, destroyed my property, and could have given me a heart attack, and you want to chalk it up to confusion?" "Sir, please calm down. Don't tell me to calm down in my own home." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was beyond caring. "I served this country for 26 years. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I've got 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a back full of shrapnel, and this is how I get treated? Like some common criminal?" Behind Mitchell, his team shifted uncomfortably. They were starting to realize the magnitude of their error. This wasn't some drug dealer's house. This was the home of a veteran, someone who'd bled for the flag they wore on their uniforms. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling every one of my 78 years. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marcus Thompson, president of our local VFW chapter, and a man who knew how to raise hell when hell needed raising. "Jack?" Marcus answered on the second ring. "Everything okay? You sound—" "Marcus, I need you to make a call," I interrupted, my eyes never leaving Mitchell's face. "Remember that favor General Landry said he owed me? I'm calling it in." "Jesus, Jack, what happened?" "SWAT team just raided my house by mistake. Tased me, terrorized Duke, treated me like a terrorist. I want Landry to know about it, now." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus had served in the Gulf War, knew the weight of calling in favors from 4-star generals. You didn't do it lightly. But he also knew I wouldn't ask unless it was serious. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, and hung up. Mitchell stepped forward. "Sir, there's no need to escalate this. We can handle this through proper channels." "Proper channels?" I laughed. but there was no humor in it. "Son, you just conducted an armed raid on the wrong house. You assaulted a decorated veteran. You think your proper channels are going to make this right?" The crowd outside had grown larger. I could see phones out, recording everything. In the age of social media, Mitchell and his team's mistake was probably already trending on Twitter. Good. Let the world see what happens when military tactics get used on American citizens in their own homes. Duke had crept out of his corner and pressed against my leg again, still shaking. I reached down to pet him, trying to reassure him that the bad men weren't going to hurt us anymore, even though I wasn't entirely sure of that myself. "We need to go," one of Mitchell's team members said urgently, looking at his phone. "This is already on Facebook. The captain's calling." But before they could make their retreat, I heard a sound that took me back to my military days. The deep rumble of military vehicles. Not the modified police vehicles that SWAT used, but actual military hardware. The windows rattled as the convoy approached, and I couldn't help but smile. Marcus had said 5 minutes. General Michael Landry had made it in 7. The lead Humvee pulled up directly in front of my house, followed by 3 more. The doors opened and out stepped soldiers in ACUs, Army combat uniforms, moving with the practiced efficiency of troops who'd seen real combat zones, not just training exercises. And from the lead vehicle emerged a figure I hadn't seen in person in 5 years, but would recognize anywhere. General Michael Landry, commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, looked exactly as I remembered him. 6'2", built like a linebacker despite being in his late 50s, with silver eagles gleaming on his shoulders and a face that could have been carved from granite. He surveyed the scene, SWAT vehicles, officers in tactical gear, neighbors with phones, and me standing in my doorway looking like I'd been through a blender, and his expression darkened. "Secure the perimeter," he ordered his troops, who immediately moved to create a barrier between the gathering crowd and my property. Then he strode forward, his dress uniform impeccable despite the rapid response, his eyes locked on mine. "Jack," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 35 years of military service. "You hurt?" "I'll live," I replied, though my chest still burned and my heart was doing things that would probably concern my cardiologist. But they scared Duke pretty bad. The general's eyes softened slightly at the mention of my dog. He knew what Duke meant to me. We'd talked about it during one of his visits to Walter Reed when I was recovering from my last tour. A soldier's dog was more than a pet. It was a lifeline to sanity, a reason to get up in the morning, a bridge between the warrior you were and the civilian you were trying to become. He turned to Mitchell, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You in charge here, Sergeant?" Mitchell, who had seemed so intimidating bursting through my door, now looked like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Yes, sir. Sergeant Mitchell, Metro SWAT." "Well, Sergeant Mitchell," Landry said, his voice dangerously quiet, "would you care to explain why one of my former operators is standing here looking like he's been worked over by enemy combatants?" My former operators. With those 3 words, Landry had established the dynamic. I wasn't just some random civilian to him. I was one of his boys, someone who'd served under his command, someone he was personally responsible for even years after our official relationship had ended. "Sir, there was a mistake with the warrant," Mitchell began. "We were supposed to hit 413, not 431. It was an honest error." "An honest error?" Landry's voice rose slightly, and I saw Mitchell's team take an involuntary step back. "You conducted a no-knock raid on the wrong house. Assaulted a decorated veteran. A man who has more combat experience than your entire team combined. And you call it an honest error?" "General," I interjected, partly because Mitchell looked like he was about to wet himself, and partly because I wanted to make sure Landry understood the full scope of the situation. They tased me, in my own doorway, and they threatened to shoot Duke. If Landry's expression had been dark before, it now turned positively thunderous. "They did what?" One of Landry's aides, a young captain I didn't recognize, stepped forward with a tablet. "Sir, it's already viral. The neighbor's video has over 50,000 views in the past 10 minutes. News vans are en route." Landry took the tablet, watched for a moment, and I saw his jaw clench. He handed it back to his aide and turned to face Mitchell's entire team. "Gentlemen," he said, and the word dripped with disdain. "Do you have any idea who you just assaulted? This is Master Sergeant Jack Tennessee Hart. 26 years of service, Ranger qualified, Special Forces, more deployments than I can count. This man saved my son's life in Kandahar when insurgents overran our FOB. He carried him 2 miles through hostile territory with 3 bullets in his back." The SWAT team had gone very still. One of the younger officers looked like he might be sick. "This man," Landry continued, "has shed more blood for this country than most people have in their entire bodies. He's earned the right to live in peace in his own home without being terrorized by people who should know better." "Sir," Mitchell tried again, "we followed protocol." "Your protocol is flawed if it leads to this." Landry cut him off. He turned to his aide. "Captain Morrison, I want Jag on the phone. Now. And get me the mayor, the chief of police, and whoever authorized this warrant. I want to know how a simple typo led to one of America's heroes being assaulted in his own home." The efficiency with which Landry's staff moved was a thing of beauty. Phones appeared, calls were made, and within minutes the quiet residential street had transformed into a command center. I watched it all from my doorway, one hand on Duke's head, trying to process how my quiet Tuesday morning had turned into this circus. "Jack," Landry said, turning back to me, "we need to get you checked out. That taser—" "I'm fine," I lied. "Bullshit." He knew me too well. "Morrison, get a medic over here. Full workup." He looked down at Duke, who was still trembling against my leg. "And get a vet for the dog. If these assholes traumatized him, I want it documented." Mitchell stepped forward one more time, desperation creeping into his voice. "General, I understand you're upset, but this is a civilian matter. You don't have jurisdiction." Landry turned on him so fast, Mitchell actually stepped back. "Jurisdiction? You want to talk about jurisdiction? This man earned his jurisdiction with blood and sacrifice. He earned it in places you couldn't find on a map, doing things that would make you wet your pants. And if you think I'm going to stand by while he's abused by weekend warriors playing soldier, you're sadly mistaken." A news van pulled up, followed quickly by 2 more. Reporters scrambled out, cameras already rolling. The neighbors pressed closer, phones out, live streaming history in the making. This was no longer just a mistake. It was a national incident. "Jack," Landry said quietly, stepping closer to me. "I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened. Not to you, not to anyone, but especially not to you." I felt my eyes burning, and I wasn't sure if it was from the residual effects of the taser or something else. Here was a 4-star general, a man who commanded thousands, apologizing to me for something that wasn't his fault, simply because he felt responsible for the well-being of everyone who'd ever served under him. "It's not your fault, Mike," I said, using his first name for the first time since he'd gotten his first star. "But I appreciate you coming." "Are you kidding? When Marcus called and said you were in trouble, I grabbed whoever was in the office and hauled ass over here. Would have been here sooner, but traffic's a bitch." Despite everything, I laughed. Here was one of the most powerful men in the military, and he was complaining about traffic like any other commuter. A medic appeared at my elbow. Landry's people worked fast, and started checking my vitals. I submitted to the examination mainly because Landry's expression suggested arguing would be pointless. My blood pressure was elevated, no surprise there, and there were burn marks where the taser probes had hit. But otherwise, I seemed to have survived the encounter. Duke was less fortunate. The veterinarian who arrived, and God knows how Landry's people found one so quickly, diagnosed acute stress response. My tough, loyal companion who'd been my rock through countless bad nights was traumatized, possibly permanently, because some cops couldn't read an address correctly. While the medic worked on me and the vet examined Duke, Landry's aide approached with a phone. "Sir, the mayor's on line 1, chief of police on line 2, and CNN wants a statement." "Tell CNN they'll get a statement when I'm good and ready," Landry growled. "And tell the mayor and the chief they better have some damn good explanations ready." He took the phone and walked a few steps away, but his voice carried clearly. "Mr. Mayor, Yes, this is General Landry. I'm standing in front of the home of one of my former operators, a decorated veteran who was just assaulted by your SWAT team. No, I don't care about protocol. I care about the fact that Master Sergeant Hart was tased in his own doorway because your people can't read addresses. Yes, I expect a full investigation, and I expect consequences. The SWAT team hadn't moved. They stood in a loose cluster near their vehicles, watching as their mistake spiraled into something beyond their worst nightmares. Mitchell kept checking his phone, his face growing paler with each glance. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Sergeant Mitchell," I called out. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes that maybe I was going to let him off the hook. "You said this was an honest error. Do you know what we called honest errors in Afghanistan?" He shook his head. "Fatal. Because that's what honest errors get you in combat. People killed. You're lucky this happened here, where the only casualties were my faith in local law enforcement and my dog's mental health. If you'd made this kind of mistake in Kandahar, we'd be zipping you up in body bags right now." "Jack," Landry had returned, phone call finished. "The mayor sends his personal apologies. The chief of police is launching a full investigation, and Sergeant Mitchell here is suspended pending review." Mitchell's shoulders sagged. One of his team members started to protest, but a look from Landry silenced him. "Additionally," Landry continued, "the city will be covering all medical expenses for you and Duke, plus damages to your property and—" He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. "A substantial settlement for the violation of your civil rights. The mayor was very understanding once I explained the situation." I'll bet he was. Having a 4-star general explain that your police force had just assaulted a war hero tends to make politicians very understanding very quickly. "I don't want their money," I said. "I want an apology, a real one, and I want assurances this won't happen to anyone else." "You'll get both," Landry assured me. "The chief is implementing new training protocols, starting with address verification. Amazing how a little public embarrassment can motivate reform." The crowd had continued to grow. I recognized faces from around the neighborhood, people I'd waved to for years but never really talked to. Now they were seeing me not as the quiet old man with the dog, but as something else. A warrior, a hero, a victim of the system he'd fought to protect. Jennifer Hayes, the young woman who'd been recording from the beginning, approached tentatively. "Mr. Hart, I'm so sorry this happened to you." "I got it all on video if you need it for evidence." "Thank you, Jennifer," I said, remembering her name from the few times we'd chatted over the fence. "I appreciate that." "My brother's in the army," she said quietly. "Third deployment to Syria. I can't imagine him coming home to something like this." And that, really, was the heart of it. How many veterans came home from serving their country only to be treated like enemies in their own neighborhoods? How many police actions were justified by fear rather than facts? How many mistakes were excused as protocol? The medic finished his examination and pronounced me relatively unharmed, though he recommended I follow up with my regular doctor. The vet gave Duke a mild sedative and suggested I keep him quiet for a few days. Watch for signs of continued stress. Landry's aide presented me with a card for a veterinary psychologist who specialized in traumatized animals, because apparently that was a thing now, and the Army would be covering the cost. As the scene began to wind down, Mitchell approached one more time. His team had already left, recalled to the station to face whatever consequences awaited them. He stood in front of me, no longer the intimidating figure who'd burst through my door, just a man who'd made a terrible mistake. "Mr. Hart," he began, then seemed to reconsider. "Master Sergeant Hart? I owe you an apology, a real one. We train for these scenarios, run drills, talk about precision and accuracy, but somewhere along the way we forgot that there are real people behind those doors. Real lives we're affecting. I forgot that today, and I'm sorry." I studied him for a long moment. He was young, probably had a family, certainly had a career that was now in jeopardy. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to let him twist in the wind of his own making. But I'd learned long ago that holding on to anger was like holding on to a hot coal. You were the one who got burned. Apology accepted, I said finally. But do better. Train better. Be better. Because next time it might not be an old vet with connections who gets raided by mistake. It might be someone who can't fight back, who doesn't have a general on speed dial. You owe it to them to make sure there isn't a next time. Mitchell nodded, relief and determination warring on his face. Yes, sir, I will. We will. He left then, climbing into his personal vehicle. His SWAT truck had already been towed back to the station. I watched him go, wondering if he'd learn from this or if he'd just become more careful about checking addresses. You did good, Jack, Landry said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Grace under pressure, as always. Didn't feel very graceful when I was face down on my floor, I admitted. Grace isn't about not falling. It's about how you get back up. He looked around at the slowly dispersing crowd, the news vans still filming, his soldiers maintaining their perimeter. This is going to be big, you know. National news. You're about to become the face of police reform, whether you want to be or not. I just wanted to have coffee with Duke and maybe watch The Price is Right, I said. And he laughed. Well, Bob Barker will have to wait. You've got bigger things to deal with now. His expression grew serious. But I'll be here for it. Whatever you need, whatever comes next, you've got the full support of the 82nd Airborne behind you. That's a promise. As the morning wore on, the circus gradually packed up and moved on. The news vans left to file their stories. The neighbors returned to their homes, though I knew I'd be getting casseroles and concerned visits for weeks to come. Landry's soldiers packed up with military efficiency, though the general himself stayed until everything was sorted. By noon, my quiet residential street had returned to something approaching normal, though I knew nothing would really be normal again. My door frame was damaged from where they'd slammed it open. There were boot prints on my hardwood floors, scuff marks on my walls. Duke still flinched at sudden movements, pressing close to me whenever anyone approached. But there were good things, too. The mayor himself showed up around 1 p.m., full of apologies and promises of reform. The chief of police came by separately, bringing a department psychologist to check on both Duke and me. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years stopped by to express their outrage and support. And through it all, Duke stayed by my side. My loyal companion, traumatized but unbroken, reminding me why I'd called in that favor from Landry in the first place. Not for me. I'd survived worse than a taser and some rough handling. But for Duke, who'd done nothing wrong except love an old soldier who happened to live at the wrong address. That evening, as the sun set over Maple Street, I sat on my porch with Duke at my feet. He was calmer now, the sedative helping, though I could still feel the tension in his body when cars drove by too fast. General Landry had left hours ago, but not before extracting promises from every official in the city that this would never happen again. My phone had been ringing all day. Reporters wanting interviews, veterans organizations offering support, lawyers smelling a lawsuit. I'd deal with all of that tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted to sit with my dog and try to make sense of a world where serving your country for 26 years could end with you face down on your own floor. We're okay, boy, I told Duke, scratching behind his ears the way he liked. We're okay. He looked up at me with those soulful brown eyes, and I could see he wanted to believe me. Hell, I wanted to believe me. But we both knew something had shifted that morning. The safety I'd thought I'd found in this quiet neighborhood, the peace I'd sought after years of war, had been shattered by a simple typo and the aggressive tactics of people who should have known better. But we'd survived. More than that, we'd fought back in the only way that mattered. Not with violence, but with truth, with connections, with the bonds forged in combat that even retirement couldn't break. General Landry had shown up for me the way I'd once shown up for his son in Kandahar, completing a circle of loyalty that no amount of time or distance could break. That's what they don't understand. These young cops playing soldier. Real warriors don't fight because they love violence. We fight to protect what we love. And when we're done fighting overseas, we come home hoping to find peace, hoping to tend our gardens and walk our dogs and maybe, just maybe, forget the weight of the rifle in our hands. But when that peace is shattered, when we're forced to fight again, we don't fight alone. We have brothers and sisters who've walked through hell with us, who understand the cost of freedom in ways most people never will. We have leaders like Landry who remember that command doesn't end with discharge papers, that taking care of your people is a lifetime commitment. The streetlights came on, casting long shadows across my lawn. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and interviews and probably more chaos. But tonight, it was just me and Duke, two old soldiers sitting on a porch in Tennessee, grateful to have survived another unexpected battle. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Landry. "Check the news. Mitchell just held a press conference. You'll want to see this." I pulled up the local news on my phone. There was Sergeant Mitchell standing in front of the police station, looking haggard but determined. "This morning my team and I made a terrible mistake," he was saying. "We traumatized an American hero and his service dog through our negligence and aggressive tactics. This is not who we are supposed to be. This is not who I want to be. Effective immediately, I'm volunteering to undergo additional training in de-escalation techniques and veteran awareness. I'm also proposing that all SWAT operations include mandatory address verification by at least 2 officers before any tactical action is taken." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "To Master Sergeant Hart, if you're watching this, I want you to know that your service and sacrifice will not be forgotten, and neither will the lesson you taught me today. We must do better. I must do better. And I will." I set the phone down, feeling something ease in my chest. Maybe some good would come from this after all. Maybe Mitchell would become the kind of cop who thought before he acted, who saw the human being behind the address. Maybe other departments would take note, implement changes, remember that the citizens they served included people who'd already sacrificed more than most could imagine. Duke stirred at my feet, lifting his head to look at me. I could see the question in his eyes, the same question I'd been asking myself all day. Were we safe? Could we trust again? Would tomorrow bring more men with guns and orders? Or could we finally have the peace we'd earned? "I don't know, buddy," I told him honestly. "But we've got good people watching our 6 now. That has to count for something." He settled back down, apparently satisfied with that answer. And maybe that was enough for now. We'd faced the storm and come through it, battered but not broken. We had allies we hadn't known about, support we hadn't expected, and a community that had finally seen us for who we really were. The night air was cool on my face, carrying the scent of Mrs. Wilson's roses from next door. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked and Duke's ears perked up before settling back down. Life on Maple Street was returning to normal, or at least a new version of normal where everyone knew the old man at 431 wasn't just another retiree, but a warrior who'd earned his peace the hard way. My phone rang. Marcus Thompson checking in for the 5th time that day. "Jack, you doing okay? Hell of a thing this morning." "I'm good, Marcus. Tired, but good. Thank Landry again for me, will you? I owe him one. He says you're square. Says anybody who saved his boy doesn't owe him anything ever again. But Jack, the VFW wants to do something. This can't stand. We're talking about organizing, maybe pushing for new legislation. Tomorrow, Marcus," I interrupted gently. "Let's deal with all that tomorrow. Tonight I just want to sit with my dog and be grateful we're both still here." "Roger that. But this isn't over, Jack. We're going to make sure this never happens to another vet. You've got my word on that." After he hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A simple typo, 413 instead of 431, had set in motion a series of actions that could have ended tragically. Instead, it had revealed the strength of bonds forged in combat, the power of standing up for what's right, and the importance of remembering that every address represents a human being with a story, a history, a right to dignity and respect. Duke shifted, pressing closer to my leg. I reached down to pet him, feeling the slight tremor that still ran through his body. The vet had said it might take weeks or even months for him to fully recover from the trauma, but we'd work through it together, the way we'd worked through my nightmares and his fear of thunderstorms. That's what partners did. They helped each other through the hard times. "You know what, Duke?" I said, making a decision. "Tomorrow we're going to the pet store, getting you a new bed, maybe some of those fancy treats you like, and then we're going to the park, and we're going to show everyone that we're not afraid, that we're not going to let one bad morning define us." He looked up at me, tail giving a tentative wag. It was the first time he'd wagged his tail since the raid, and I felt my eyes burn with unexpected tears. That's when I understood what this had really been about. Not just a wrong address or excessive force or even the disrespect shown to a veteran. It was about resilience, about getting knocked down and getting back up, about finding hope in the midst of trauma and holding on to it with both hands. I'd learned that lesson in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in a dozen other places where hope seemed as scarce as water in the desert.
But I'd forgotten that the lesson applied here too, in this quiet neighborhood in Tennessee, where danger could come not from insurgents or IEDs, but from the very people sworn to protect and serve. The stars were coming out now, faint but visible despite the streetlights. I picked out Polaris, the North Star, the constant navigator that had guided warriors home for millennia. Still there, still steady, still showing the way. "Come on, Duke," I said, standing with a groan that reminded me of every one of my 78 years. "Let's go inside. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." He followed me in, staying close, but I could see a bit of his old confidence returning. We'd get through this, just like we'd gotten through everything else. Because that's what soldiers do. We endure, we adapt, we overcome. As I locked the door behind us, the same door that had been violated that morning, I thought about all the veterans out there who might face similar situations,
Who might not have a General Landry to call, who might not have neighbors to record the injustice, who might not survive the encounter. This fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for tonight, Duke and I were safe in our home, surrounded by the support of our community and the brotherhood of arms that transcended rank and time and distance. And that, I thought as I prepared Duke's dinner and poured myself a well-earned whiskey, was its own kind of victory. Not the kind won with bullets and bombs, but with courage and connection and the refusal to let fear win. Duke ate his dinner with more enthusiasm than he'd shown all day, and I took that as a good sign. We'd heal from this, both of us. It would take time and patience, and probably a lot of those veterinary psychology sessions Landry's aide had mentioned. But we'd make it, because that's what warriors do. We survive. We endure. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to do it with a loyal dog by our side, and the knowledge that when we call for backup, our brothers in arms will always answer. The whiskey burned warm in my chest as I settled into my recliner, Duke curling up on his bed nearby. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, but tonight, we were home. We were safe, and we were not alone. And in the end, that's all any soldier really wants: to come home, to find peace, and to know that the sacrifices made in foreign lands still matter in the place we fought so hard to return to. As sleep finally came, I thought I heard Duke's tail thump once against his bed. Small victories, I thought. Sometimes, those are the most important ones of all.